I still remember that summer camping trip like it was yesterday, even though it's been several years now. It was one of those perfect weekends in late July when the air was warm but not stifling, and the forecast promised clear skies for stargazing. Our group of 6 friends had been planning this getaway for months, a much-needed escape from our busy lives in the city. We'd all been friends since college, except for him. Alex was relatively new to our circle, having been introduced to us through my roommate about 6 months earlier. From the moment I met him, there was something about Alex that drew me in. Maybe it was his easy laugh or the way he seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Whatever it was, I found myself looking forward to group hangouts more than usual, hoping he'd be there. The drive to the campsite took about 3 hours, all of us packed into 2 cars with gear stuffed in every available space. I ended up in the same car as Alex, sitting together in the back seat while our friend Jamie drove and blasted nostalgic 90s hits that had us all singing along. During that drive, Alex and I discovered we shared a love for the same obscure podcast about unsolved mysteries, and the conversation flowed effortlessly from there. Our knees occasionally bumped as the car rounded corners, each touch sending a small jolt through me that I tried desperately to ignore. When we finally arrived at the campsite nestled in the mountains, the sun was just beginning its descent, casting everything in a golden glow that made the moment feel almost magical. Tall pines surrounded the clearing, and in the distance, we could hear the rushing sound of a stream. The air smelled of pine needles and earth, so different from the city air we were used to breathing. Everyone piled out of the cars, stretching and taking in deep breaths of the clean mountain air, exclaiming about how beautiful it was and how long it had been since we'd all been camping together. The campsite had 3 tent spots available, but our group had only brought 2 tents, a larger 6-person tent that most of us planned to share, and a smaller 2-person tent that Jamie and his girlfriend had brought for themselves. As we unloaded the gear and began setting up camp, it became clear that the larger tent, while advertised as a 6-person, would be a tight squeeze for 5 of us. We joked about how tent manufacturers must assume campers are much smaller people or perhaps contortionists. I don't mind sleeping under the stars if it's too crowded, I offered, though the thought of potential rain or creepy crawlies wasn't particularly appealing. That's when Alex spoke up. The tent should fit 4 comfortably. Why don't you and I take the smaller tent? Jamie and Lisa probably want their privacy anyway, he suggested with a casual shrug that belied the impact his words had on me. My heart did a little flip in my chest. The smaller tent was indeed meant for 2 people, but it would still be a cozy fit. Very cozy. Jamie and Lisa quickly agreed, looking relieved that they wouldn't have to give up their private accommodations. Our other friends, Taylor, Morgan, and Casey, seemed fine with the arrangement too, already claiming their spots in the larger tent. And just like that, it was decided. Alex and I would be tent mates for the weekend. As we began setting up our tent, I tried to act nonchalant, like sharing such a small space with someone I was increasingly attracted to was no big deal. The tent was a simple dome design, quick to set up but definitely compact inside. We worked together efficiently, me holding poles in place while Alex secured them, our hands occasionally brushing in a way that felt both accidental and somehow inevitable. So, which side do you want? I asked once the tent was up, trying to keep my voice casual as we stood looking at the small interior space. There wasn't much choice, really. It was basically 2 sleeping bag widths with a narrow strip down the middle. Alex glanced at the tent, then at me with those warm brown eyes that always seemed to see more than I wanted to reveal. I'll take the inside spot, if that's okay with you, he said. Unless you'd prefer it. The inside spot meant he'd be positioned between me and the tent wall, essentially placing us right next to each other with no buffer space. He could have chosen to sleep with the middle strip between us, giving us both a little more personal space. But he didn't, and I didn't suggest it either. That's fine with me, I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray the flutter of nerves I felt. I sometimes need to get up during the night anyway, so being near the door makes sense. It was a practical explanation, but we both knew there was more to it than that. As we unrolled our sleeping bags side by side, I couldn't help but wonder if he had made that choice deliberately. Was he feeling this same strange tension that had been building between us for months? Or was I reading too much into a simple sleeping arrangement? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity as we finished setting up camp. We collected firewood, filtered water from the nearby stream, and unpacked the food we'd brought for cooking over the campfire. There was an easy camaraderie among the group, everyone falling into roles that suited them. Alex turned out to be surprisingly skilled at building a fire, carefully arranging the kindling and larger pieces of wood into a structure that caught quickly and burned steadily. Eagle Scout, he explained with a grin when he caught me watching him. Some skills you never forget. As dusk settled around us, we gathered around the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across our faces. Someone brought out a bottle of whiskey that was passed around the circle, the alcohol warming me from the inside as the fire warmed me from the outside. Stories flowed as freely as the drinks. Tales from our college days, embarrassing first date experiences, and dreams for the future. I found myself watching Alex more than participating, noticing how the firelight caught in his hair and how his laugh seemed to start in his eyes before reaching his mouth. Several times I looked up to find him already watching me, our gazes holding for just a moment longer than necessary before one of us would look away. After dinner, foil packets of vegetables and sausages cooked directly in the embers. Morgan brought out a bag of marshmallows for s'mores. As we roasted them over the fire, Alex leaned close to me, our shoulders touching. "You're doing it wrong," he teased, nodding at my marshmallow that was already engulfed in flames. "You need patience. Low and slow is the way to go. Maybe I like them burnt," I countered, pulling my flaming marshmallow away from the fire and blowing it out with perhaps more dramatic flair than necessary. Alex laughed and held out his perfectly golden brown marshmallow. "Try a proper one first, then decide." Without thinking, I leaned forward and took a bite directly from his stick, the sweet, gooey confection melting on my tongue. Our eyes met over the marshmallow, and something shifted in the air between us. It was such a small moment, insignificant really, but somehow it felt intimate in a way that made my cheeks flush, and not from the heat of the fire. As the night deepened and the stars emerged in breathtaking clarity above us, our friends began to yawn and drift off to their tent. Jamie and Lisa were the first to go, followed shortly by Taylor and Casey. Morgan stayed by the fire with us a bit longer, but eventually stood up with a stretch. "Don't stay up too late, you two," Morgan said with a knowing smile that made me wonder if our attraction was more obvious to others than we thought. "And make sure the fire's completely out before you turn in." Then it was just Alex and me, sitting side by side on a log, the crackling fire before us and the vast starry sky above. The conversation between us flowed easily, as it always did, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation now, a sense that something was shifting. "I'm glad we ended up as tent mates," Alex said after a comfortable lull in conversation, his voice soft in the quiet night. "I've been wanting to get to know you better, away from the usual group dynamic." My heart skipped a beat at his words. "Me too," I admitted, finding courage in the darkness. "I've enjoyed talking with you these past few months." "Just talking?" he asked, and even in the dim firelight, I could see the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't completely give away how I felt, a loud crack sounded from the woods behind us, making us both jump. Probably just a branch falling or an animal moving through the underbrush, but in the darkness, every sound seemed magnified. "Maybe we should head to bed," I suggested, suddenly aware of how late it had gotten. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the temperature had dropped considerably. Alex nodded, and together we made sure the fire was properly extinguished, pouring water over the coals and stirring them to ensure no hot spots remained. We used our phone flashlights to guide us back to our tent, the beam cutting through the darkness and catching on the reflective strips of our tent. The reality of our sleeping arrangement hit me anew as we stood before the small dome. We'd be sleeping inches apart all night. I suddenly felt nervous in a way I hadn't since my teenage years. "After you," Alex said, holding the tent flap open for me. The inside of the tent felt even smaller than it had looked earlier. Our sleeping bags took up nearly the entire floor space, with just enough room at the end for our backpacks. I slipped off my shoes and placed them in the tent vestibule, then crawled onto my sleeping bag, trying to move with a grace I definitely didn't feel. Alex followed, zipping the tent closed behind him and sealing us into our own private world. We both went through the motions of getting ready for bed, changing into sleep clothes, awkwardly turning away from each other in the confined space, brushing teeth using water bottles, and setting up small camp pillows. Every movement seemed charged with awareness of the other person just inches away. Finally, we were both settled into our sleeping bags, lying on our backs and staring up at the tent ceiling. The nylon fabric glowed faintly with moonlight, and outside, the sounds of the forest created a gentle soundtrack. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant hooting of an owl, the soft chirping of crickets. "Can I tell you something?" Alex's voice came softly through the darkness. "Of course," I replied, turning my head to look at his profile. "I specifically asked Jamie if I could share a tent with you before we even left for this trip," he confessed. "I didn't know it would end up being this small tent, but I'm not complaining." My breath caught in my throat. Really, he confirmed, turning onto his side to face me. In the dim light, I could just make out his features. "I've wanted to get to know you better since the day we met. There's something about you that just draws me in." I turned onto my side as well, our faces now just inches apart. "I've felt the same way," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I look forward to seeing you every time our group gets together." "Just seeing me?" he asked, echoing his question from earlier by the fire. This time, I found my courage. "No, not just seeing you. Talking with you. Being near you. All of it." I could see his smile even in the darkness. "Good. Because I feel the same way." The air between us seemed charged with possibility. I was acutely aware of every inch of space between us, of the sound of his breathing, of the faint scent of wood smoke that clung to both of us. A sudden gust of wind shook the tent, making the fabric flutter noisily. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand landing on his arm. He covered my hand with his own, warm and reassuring. "Just the wind," he said softly, but neither of us moved to break the contact. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, intertwined his fingers with mine. Such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt monumental. We lay there like that, facing each other, hands joined between us, neither speaking for what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. "I'm really glad you chose the inside spot," I finally whispered. "So am I," he replied, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. Whether it was the intimacy of the darkness, the isolation of being away from our everyday lives, or simply the culmination of months of growing attraction, something gave me the courage to lean forward slightly, closing the small distance between us. Our first kiss was gentle, questioning, a soft press of lips that asked rather than demanded. When we pulled apart, I could feel his smile against my mouth. "I've been wanting to do that for months," he confessed, his voice a low murmur in the darkness. "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. I wasn't sure if you felt the same way, and I didn't want to make things awkward for the group if you didn't. I laughed softly. "I've been thinking the exact same thing." "Well," he said, his hand moving to gently cup my cheek. "I'm glad we're on the same page now." Our second kiss was deeper, more certain. His arm slipped around my waist, pulling me closer until our sleeping bags were pressed together. We stayed like that for what could have been minutes or hours, talking softly between kisses, sharing stories and secrets that seemed easier to tell in the darkness of our small tent, far from the complications of our regular lives. Eventually, we drifted off to sleep, still facing each other, his arm draped over my waist, and our foreheads nearly touching. I fell asleep to the sound of his steady breathing and the knowledge that whatever happened next, something important had begun in this small tent under the stars. Morning came with birdsong and the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the tent fabric. I woke to find Alex already awake, watching me with a soft expression that made my heart flutter all over again. "Good morning," he said quietly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Morning," I replied, suddenly a bit shy in the light of day. "How long have you been awake?" "Not long," he said. "I was just thinking about how glad I am that we ended up here, like this." Before I could respond, we heard our friends moving around outside, the sounds of the camp coming to life. Reality was intruding on our private world. "Should we talk about what this means?" I asked, gesturing vaguely between us. "Before we go out there?" Alex took my hand, bringing it to his lips for a brief kiss. "I think it means I'd like to take you on a proper date when we get back to the city. If you want that too." The simplicity and clarity of his words made me smile. "I'd like that very much." "Good," he said, leaning in for one more quick kiss before we had to face our friends and the inevitable teasing that would come when they noticed the shift between us. And they did notice, almost immediately. As we emerged from our tent, trying to act casual, Morgan took one look at us and broke into a knowing grin. Well, 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 they said, handing us each a cup of coffee from the pot already brewing over the morning fire. Looks like someone had a good night. I felt my cheeks flush, but Alex just smiled, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently. The best, he said simply. The rest of the camping trip passed in a blur of hiking, swimming in the stream, more campfire conversations, and stolen moments with Alex whenever we could find a bit of privacy. Each night in our small tent felt like a gift, a chance to explore this new connection between us without the distractions of our normal lives. By the time we were packing up to leave on Sunday afternoon, it felt like everything had changed. As we dismantled our tent, the site of our beginning, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and excitement. Sad to leave this magical place where we'd found each other, but excited for what lay ahead. You know, Alex said as we folded the tent together, our movements now synchronized after our days together. I'm really glad there was only one tent space left. I smiled, remembering how nervous I'd been just days ago at the prospect of sharing such a small space with him. And I'm really glad you chose the inside spot, right against me. He leaned in, pressing a quick kiss to my lips when the others weren't looking. Best decision I ever made. As we drove back to the city later that day, again sitting together in the back seat, his hand held mine the entire way. Whatever came next, I knew that I would always remember that summer camping trip, that small tent, and the choice that changed everything between us. Total _char_count, 18,644.